Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Derek Townsend had built his fortune on the principle that every structure needed a solid foundation. As the owner of Townsend Construction, one of Chicago's most successful development companies, he understood that even the smallest crack could bring down the mightiest building. What he hadn't expected was that his own life would crumble in an underground parking garage on a Tuesday evening. The Magnificent Mile Shopping Center's parking garage hummed with the low rumble of engines and the distant echo of car doors. Derek had just finished his monthly dinner with his 16-year-old daughter Chloe, a tradition they'd maintained even through his increasingly demanding work schedule. These evenings were sacred to him, a chance to connect with the one person in his family who still looked at him with genuine affection. Derek was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. At 42, his broad shoulders and steel-gray eyes reflected the determination that had lifted him from a working-class background to the top of Chicago's construction industry. His hands, scarred from his early days as a laborer, now signed multi-million-dollar contracts. But those same hands trembled slightly as he reached for his car keys. "Dad, I had an amazing time tonight," Chloe said, sliding into the passenger seat of his black Mercedes. Her auburn hair, so much like her mother's, caught the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Mom never takes me anywhere interesting anymore. She's always busy." The way Chloe said busy made Derek pause. His daughter was perceptive, perhaps too much so. He'd noticed the distance in his wife Brielle's behavior over the past 6 months, but he'd attributed it to the stress of their recent move to the lakefront mansion he'd built for their family. Derek started the engine, his mind already shifting to tomorrow's board meeting. The Riverside Development Project, his most ambitious undertaking yet, required his full attention. 27 luxury condominiums overlooking the Chicago River, each one a testament to his vision and expertise. "Dad, turn off your phone. Now!" Chloe's sudden shout shattered his thoughts. Her voice carried a panic he'd never heard before, sharp and urgent. Derek immediately powered off his phone, his construction-honed reflexes responding to the command before his mind could process it. "Father, look over there." Chloe's whisper was barely audible, her voice trembling like autumn leaves in a harsh wind. Derek followed her gaze across the parking garage, and what he saw made his blood freeze in his veins. Two figures stood beside a silver BMW, illuminated by the sickly yellow light of the overhead lamps. The woman's elegant posture was unmistakable. Brielle, his wife of 18 years, the woman he'd met when she was modeling for fashion magazines, and he was just a foreman with big dreams. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her designer dress hugging curves that had graced magazine covers before she'd chosen to become Mrs. Derek Townsend. But it wasn't his wife's presence that sent ice through Derek's heart. It was the man with her, Ryan Kessler, the personal trainer from the exclusive fitness club where Brielle spent her mornings. Derek knew him by sight, had even shaken his hand at a charity function. The man was younger, probably 35, with the kind of sculpted physique that came from professional athletics and careful living. They weren't just talking. Brielle's arms were wrapped around Ryan's neck, their bodies pressed together in an embrace that spoke of intimacy, of shared secrets, a betrayal so complete it seemed to echo in the hollow concrete space around them. Derek watched as Ryan's hands traced patterns on Brielle's back, watched as she tilted her head back to accept his kiss, watched as his entire world collapsed with the quiet precision of a controlled demolition. "Dad!" Chloe's voice was small, afraid. "I'm sorry. I saw them when we got out of the elevator. I didn't know if you'd seen them too." Derek's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. In that moment, he understood why Chloe had told him to turn off his phone. She knew that if Brielle called, if she tried to maintain the fiction of wherever she claimed to be tonight, Derek might have given away their presence. His daughter had protected him from a lie, even as the truth destroyed him. "How long have you known?" Derek's voice was steady, controlled. It was the same tone he used when reviewing construction budgets, when making decisions that affected hundreds of workers and millions of dollars. I suspected for a few weeks, Chloe admitted, tears streaming down her cheeks. She's been different. Happier, but not because of us. She hums when she thinks no one's listening. She buys new clothes and says they're for ladies' lunches. But the lunches never seem to involve any ladies I know. Derek nodded slowly. His daughter's intelligence had always impressed him, but now it cut like a blade. She'd been carrying this burden alone, protecting him from a truth that would have been easier to handle weeks ago than it was now, when he'd seen the physical proof of his wife's betrayal. Across the garage, Brielle and Ryan separated. Derek watched as Ryan handed her something. Keys, perhaps, or a phone. They spoke quietly, intimately, before moving toward their respective cars. The practiced ease of their goodbye suggested this wasn't their first clandestine meeting. "We're going home," Derek said quietly, "and we're going to act like tonight never happened. Can you do that for me, Chloe?" His daughter nodded, wiping her eyes. "What are you going to do, Dad?" Derek started the Mercedes and pulled out of the parking space, timing his departure to avoid crossing paths with either Brielle or Ryan. As they drove through the garage's exit ramp, he caught a glimpse of the silver BMW in his rearview mirror, followed moments later by Brielle's white Porsche. "I'm going to build something," Derek said, his voice carrying the same quiet determination that had built his empire. "But first, I need to understand exactly what I'm working with." The drive home was silent except for the hum of the engine and the distant sounds of the city. Derek's mind was already working, processing information, calculating possibilities. In construction, when you discovered structural damage, you had two choices: repair it or tear it down and start over. As they pulled into the circular driveway of their lakefront mansion, the house Derek had designed and built as a symbol of their success, their family, their love, he realized that some damage was beyond repair. But Derek Townsend had never been a man to walk away from challenge. He'd built his fortune by being smarter, more ruthless, and more patient than his competitors. Now, as the automatic garage door closed behind them, he began to plan the most important project of his life. The foundation of his marriage had cracked. Now he would engineer its complete collapse, brick by brick, beam by beam, until nothing remained but dust and regret. Chapter 2: Blueprints of Betrayal. Derek's home office occupied the entire top floor of the lakefront mansion, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Lake Michigan. He designed the space to reflect power and success. Mahogany desk, leather-bound chairs, walls lined with architectural awards and photos from groundbreaking ceremonies. Tonight, 3 days after the parking garage revelation, it felt more like a war room. The morning sun cast long shadows across the architectural plans spread on his desk, but Derek's attention was focused on a different kind of blueprint. On his computer screen, bank statements and credit card records painted a picture of deception that went deeper than a simple affair. Brielle's spending patterns over the past 8 months revealed a story Derek had been too busy to notice. Designer clothing purchases that far exceeded her usual expensive tastes. Hotel charges in downtown Chicago when she claimed to be shopping. Restaurant bills for 2 at places she'd never mentioned visiting. Most telling of all, a recurring monthly payment to RK Fitness Consulting, Ryan Kessler's personal training business. Derek leaned back in his chair, processing the information with the same methodical approach he brought to construction projects. His wife wasn't just having an affair. She was funding it with his money, building a relationship that had been developing for nearly a year. The office door opened quietly, and Chloe entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. Since the parking garage incident, his daughter had become his unofficial ally, though they'd barely spoken about what they'd witnessed. She set 1 cup on his desk and settled into the chair across from him. "Mom left early again," Chloe said, her voice carefully neutral. She said she had a yoga class, then lunch with Mrs. Patterson. Derek pulled up Mrs. Patterson's contact information on his phone and hit call. The conversation was brief and telling. "She canceled on Eleanor Patterson 2 hours ago," Derek said after hanging up. "Emergency at the salon, apparently." Chloe nodded, unsurprised. "Dad, I need to tell you something else. Last week, when you were in Milwaukee for the hotel project, she didn't come home one night. She called, and said she was staying with her sister in Evanston because Rachel was having marriage problems. Derek's sister-in-law Rachel lived in Phoenix and had been happily married for 15 years. Another lie, another brick in the wall of deception his wife had been building. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Derek asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because I hoped I was wrong," Chloe said, tears threatening. "Because I wanted our family to be real, not just something that looked good from the outside." Derek stood and moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the morning sky. His daughter's words cut deeper than Brielle's betrayal. Chloe had seen what he'd been too distracted to notice, that their family had become a facade, a beautiful structure built on compromised foundations. "Tell me about Ryan Kessler," Derek said. Chloe was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "He used to be a professional athlete. Baseball, I think. Mom mentioned that he played in the minor leagues before he became a trainer. He's originally from California, moved here about 3 years ago. He specializes in working with wealthy clients, people who want privacy and personal attention." Derek turned from the window. "How do you know all this?" "Mom talks about him sometimes. Before, I thought she was just impressed by his credentials. Now," Chloe shrugged helplessly. Derek's phone buzzed with a text message from Brielle, running late tonight. "Book club is discussing a particularly challenging novel. Don't wait up. Love you." He showed the message to Chloe, who rolled her eyes. "She doesn't even belong to a book club, Dad. She says reading gives her headaches." Derek saved the message and added it to the growing file of documented lies he'd been compiling. In construction, documentation was everything. When disputes arose, when projects went wrong, when legal action became necessary, the person with the most complete records usually won. "I need you to do something for me," Derek said, returning to his desk. "But only if you're comfortable with it." Chloe straightened, eager to help. "What? Your mother trusts you. She doesn't see you as a threat to her activities. I need you to pay attention, but I don't want you to do anything that makes you uncomfortable or puts you in danger." "What kind of attention?" Derek opened a new document on his computer. "Times when she leaves, when she returns, any phone call she takes in private, any changes in her routine. Think of it as gathering intelligence." Chloe nodded seriously. "Dad, are you going to divorce her?" The question hung in the air like dust after a demolition. Derek had been asking himself the same thing for 3 days. Divorce would be clean, legal, straightforward. But it would also mean that Brielle and Ryan could continue their relationship openly, possibly even build a life together on the ruins of Derek's marriage. "I'm going to make sure she regrets every choice that led to this moment," Derek said finally. "But I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with first." Over the next few hours, Derek made a series of phone calls that gradually revealed the architecture of his wife's deception. A private investigator named Margaret Torres, recommended by his attorney, would begin surveillance immediately. A forensic accountant would audit all family financial records. A cybersecurity specialist would recover any deleted communications from Brielle's devices. The most revealing call was to Danny Reeves, Derek's oldest friend and the head of his construction company's security division. Danny had served 2 tours in Iraq before joining Townsend Construction, and his skills extended far beyond standard corporate security. "I need a complete background check on someone," Derek said, providing Ryan Kessler's details. "Employment history, financial situation, legal troubles, personal relationships. Everything. How deep do you want me to go?" Danny's voice carried the weight of shared history. They'd grown up in the same neighborhood, worked their way up from nothing together. "All the way to bedrock," Derek replied. "And Danny? This stays between us." "Always does, boss. You need me to handle anything else?" Derek considered the question. In the past 3 days, his anger had evolved from the hot, immediate rage of betrayal to something colder and more dangerous. "Not yet, but I might." That evening, Derek sat in his study reviewing the day's intelligence gathering. Margaret Torres had already provided the first surveillance photos. Brielle and Ryan entering the Fairmont Hotel at 2:30 p.m., the same time she was supposedly having lunch with Mrs. Patterson. The photos were professionally taken, clearly showing both faces, time-stamped and GPS tagged. They would be admissible in divorce court, but Derek was beginning to think that legal proceedings weren't sufficient punishment for the scale of betrayal he was uncovering. Chloe knocked softly on the doorframe. "Dad? Mom's home. She's telling me about the book club meeting, in case you ask." Derek looked up from the surveillance photos. What book were they supposedly discussing? She said it was something by Margaret Atwood, but she couldn't remember the title. Derek smiled grimly. Brielle's lies were becoming sloppier, more careless. She felt safe in her deception, protected by Derek's busy schedule and apparent trust. That false sense of security would be her downfall. "Go to bed, sweetheart," Derek said. "Tomorrow's a school day." After Chloe left, Derek returned to his computer and began drafting a detailed timeline of his wife's affair. Every lie, every unexplained absence, every dollar spent on her betrayal. He worked with the same precision he brought to construction projects, building a foundation for what was to come. By midnight, Derek had created something more valuable than any architectural plan he'd ever drawn. He had a blueprint for revenge, a systematic approach to dismantling the lives of the people who had betrayed him. But first, he needed to understand exactly who Ryan Kessler was and what weaknesses Derek could exploit. Every man had pressure points, vulnerable spots that could be leveraged by someone with the right knowledge and resources. Derek Townsend had both, and he was just getting started. Chapter 3: Structural Analysis. The rain drummed against the windows of Derek's office as he studied Danny Reeves' comprehensive report on Ryan Kessler. What he discovered was better than he'd hoped. Ryan wasn't just a personal trainer having an affair with a married woman. He was a man with a history of poor decisions and a present full of vulnerabilities. Ryan Kessler had indeed been a professional athlete, a pitcher in the Oakland Athletics minor league system until a shoulder injury ended his career at 28. But his post-baseball life painted a picture of someone who'd never learned to manage money or relationships responsibly. Danny had uncovered 3 previous affairs with married clients in California, each ending badly when the women's husbands discovered the relationships. One had resulted in a restraining order. Another had cost Ryan his job at an exclusive Beverly Hills gym. The third had forced him to leave California entirely when the husband, a prominent entertainment lawyer, made it clear that Ryan's safety could no longer be guaranteed. "He's got a pattern," Derek muttered, reviewing financial records that showed Ryan living paycheck to paycheck despite charging wealthy clients premium rates. Credit card debt, a car lease he could barely afford, and a gambling habit that had cost him nearly $30,000 in the past year. Most interesting of all, Ryan had been skimming money from his business account to cover personal expenses, a practice that would interest the IRS if properly documented. Derek's phone buzzed with a message from Margaret Torres. "Subjects are at the Renaissance Hotel, room 1247. Meeting began at 11:30 a.m. Estimated duration 2 to 3 hours based on previous patterns." Perfect timing. Derek grabbed his jacket and headed downstairs. Brielle's Porsche was gone from the garage, exactly as he'd expected. She'd left that morning claiming to have a doctor's appointment, followed by shopping with friends. Derek drove to the Renaissance Hotel, not to confront them, but to begin the next phase of his plan. He parked in the visitors section and made his way to the hotel's business center, where he had a clear view of the elevator bank and front desk. At 2:15 p.m., he watched Ryan emerge from the elevator alone, looking satisfied and slightly disheveled. Derek waited exactly 10 minutes before following him to the parking garage, memorizing Ryan's license plate and the location of his BMW. Brielle appeared 20 minutes later, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression serene. She moved through the lobby like a woman without a care in the world, completely unaware that her husband was documenting every second of her betrayal. That evening, Derek set his final trap in motion. He called Brielle from his office, his voice warm and loving. "How was your day, sweetheart?" "Oh, typical Wednesday," Brielle replied, her voice light and casual. "Dr. Martinez says I'm in perfect health, and shopping with the girls was fun but exhausting. I probably bought too much, but I found this gorgeous dress for the Riverside Project launch party." Derek smiled coldly as he added another lie to his growing file. Dr. Martinez had confirmed that Brielle hadn't had an appointment in 6 months. "I'm glad you're feeling good," Derek said. "Actually, I have some exciting news. I've decided to accelerate the timeline for the Riverside Project." We're hosting a major investor event this Saturday night at the Yacht Club. Black tie, very exclusive. Oh, that sounds wonderful, Brielle said, though Derek detected a note of concern in her voice. Will I know anyone there? Actually, yes. I'm planning to invite some of the people from your fitness club. You know, networking with the wealthy clientele. I thought I'd include that trainer you've mentioned, Ryan Kessler. You said he worked with successful people, right? The silence on the other end of the phone lasted exactly 4 seconds too long. Yes, I think that would be nice, Brielle finally said, though I'm not sure he'd fit in with that crowd. Nonsense, Derek replied smoothly. Successful people appreciate expertise in any field. I'll have my assistant send him an invitation tomorrow. Derek could practically hear his wife's mind racing, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. If she discouraged Ryan's attendance too strongly, it might seem suspicious. But having her husband and lover in the same room, especially at a business event, posed obvious risks. Maybe I should mention it to him at the gym, Brielle suggested. You know, prepare him for the invitation? That's thoughtful of you, Derek said. I'm sure he'll appreciate the heads up. After hanging up, Derek immediately called Danny Reeves. I need you to arrange something for me, Derek said. Saturday night, Yacht Club, during the investor event. Can you handle that? What kind of arrangement? Derek outlined his plan in detail. Danny listened without comment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Derek finished, there was a long pause. Boss, you sure about this? It's going to get messy. I'm certain, Derek replied. And Danny? I want everything documented. Video, audio, witness statements if necessary. Consider it done. Derek spent the rest of the evening refining his strategy. The Yacht Club event was real. He'd been planning it for months as a way to secure additional funding for the Riverside project. But now it would serve a dual purpose. In the controlled environment of a business gathering, surrounded by Chicago's elite, Derek would begin the systematic destruction of both his wife and her lover. He'd learned from studying Ryan's history that the man was impulsive, particularly when he felt threatened or cornered. Putting him in a room full of wealthy, powerful people while his affair partner's husband watched would create exactly the kind of pressure that led to mistakes. Derek opened his laptop and began composing the invitation to Ryan Kessler. The tone was friendly, professional, with just enough detail about the guest list to make Ryan understand the caliber of people who would be attending. Derek included a specific mention of the networking opportunities available for someone in the fitness industry looking to expand their client base. It was bait, carefully crafted to appeal to Ryan's financial desperation and social ambitions. Derek was betting that Ryan's ego and greed would overcome any caution about attending an event hosted by his lover's husband. As Derek sealed the envelope containing Ryan's invitation, he reflected on how much his life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, he'd been a successful businessman with a beautiful wife and daughter, living in a mansion he'd built with his own hands. Now he was the architect of a very different kind of construction project. Derek had spent his career building structures that would stand for generations. Now he was designing something meant to collapse completely, to reduce 2 lives to rubble so complete that rebuilding would be impossible. The rain continued to fall against his office windows as Derek prepared for Saturday night. In 3 days, Ryan Kessler and Brielle Townsend would walk into the most elegant trap Derek had ever constructed. Neither of them would walk out the same. Chapter 4. The Foundation Shifts. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Chicago's skyline sparkle like cut crystal. The Grand Lake Yacht Club's ballroom buzzed with conversation as Chicago's financial elite mingled over cocktails and canopy, unaware they were about to witness the carefully orchestrated downfall of 2 people they'd never met. Derek stood near the bar, resplendent in his custom Italian tuxedo, playing the perfect host while internally counting down to Ryan Kessler's arrival. Brielle moved through the crowd beside him, stunning in a midnight blue gown that had probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. To outside observers, they appeared to be the ideal power couple, successful, attractive, completely devoted to each other. Margaret Torres had positioned herself as a server among the catering staff, her small camera capturing every angle of the room. Danny Reeves worked as part of the security team, officially there to protect the wealthy guests, but actually serving as Derek's eyes and ears throughout the venue. "Derek, darling, you've outdone yourself," said Patricia Williamson, the city's most prominent socialite and wife of a federal judge. "This venue is absolutely perfect for showcasing the Riverside Project." "Patricia, you're too kind," Derek replied, his arm around Brielle's waist. "I wanted our investors to see the same vision that drove us to create something truly special." Brielle smiled appropriately, but Derek felt the tension in her body. She'd been increasingly nervous as the evening approached, clearly dreading the prospect of Ryan attending. Derek had made sure to mention the invitation several more times during the week, watching his wife's stress level increase with each reminder. At exactly 8:30 p.m., Ryan Kessler entered the ballroom. Derek had to admit the man cleaned up well. Ryan wore a rental tuxedo that fit his athletic frame perfectly, his dark hair styled conservatively, his manner appropriately subdued for the setting. He moved through the room with the careful confidence of someone trying to blend into a world he didn't quite belong to. "Ah, there's our fitness expert," Derek announced, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Ryan Kessler, I'd like you to meet some people." For the next 30 minutes, Derek played the role of gracious host, introducing Ryan to investors, board members, and social leaders. He watched with satisfaction as Ryan's initial confidence began to crack under the weight of conversations about portfolio management, international development projects, and political connections that represented more money than Ryan had ever imagined. Brielle remained at Derek's side throughout the introductions, her face a mask of polite interest while her eyes tracked Ryan's every movement. Derek could feel her growing panic as the evening progressed, and the two most important men in her life occupied the same space. "Ryan, I understand you specialize in personal training for high-net-worth individuals," said Harrison Fletcher, CEO of Fletcher Industries and one of Derek's major investors. "My wife has been looking for someone with discretion and expertise." "I do work with clients who value privacy," Ryan replied carefully. "Personal fitness is a very individual journey." Derek stepped closer to the conversation. "Ryan has been working with my wife, Brielle. Haven't you been pleased with his personal attention, darling?" The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. Brielle's face went pale, while Ryan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ryan is very dedicated to his clients," Brielle said, her voice steady despite the challenge in Derek's tone. "I'm sure he is," Derek replied, his smile never wavering. "In fact, I was thinking of hiring him myself. I'd love to discuss your training methods. Ryan, perhaps we could step outside for a private conversation." This was the moment Derek had been building toward all week. In front of a room full of witnesses, he was offering Ryan a choice: come quietly for a conversation or create a scene that would end badly for everyone involved. Ryan glanced at Brielle, a quick look that lasted just long enough for Derek to capture it. "Of course, Mr. Townsend. I'd be happy to discuss my approach." Derek led Ryan out onto the yacht club's terrace, which overlooked Lake Michigan. The October wind was sharp, cutting through their formal wear and providing the perfect backdrop for what Derek had planned. "Beautiful view," Derek said conversationally, as if he were discussing the weather. "I come here when I need to think clearly about complex problems." Ryan remained silent, clearly understanding that this wasn't a casual conversation. "You know, Ryan, I've been in construction for 20 years, Derek continued, his voice calm and measured. "I've learned that every structure has weak points. Sometimes they're obvious, a crack in the foundation, a beam that can't handle the load. Other times, the weakness is hidden deep inside, invisible until the whole thing comes crashing down." "Mr. Townsend, I'm not sure what you're getting at." Derek turned to face Ryan directly. "I think you know exactly what I'm getting at. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize when a structure is about to collapse." For a moment, the two men faced each other in silence, the sounds of the party drifting through the glass doors behind them. Derek could see Ryan calculating, trying to determine how much Derek knew and what his options might be. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Ryan said finally. "Has there?" Derek pulled out his phone and showed Ryan one of Margaret Torres' surveillance photos. Ryan and Brielle entering the Renaissance Hotel 3 days earlier. This was taken Tuesday afternoon. According to my wife, she was shopping with friends. Ryan's face went white, but Derek wasn't finished. He scrolled to another photo, this one showing the two of them kissing in the hotel parking garage. 8 months, Derek said quietly. That's how long this has been going on. 8 months of lies, of stolen money, of my wife coming home to me after spending afternoons in hotel rooms with you. Look, Mr. Townsend. Derek's voice carried the same tone he used when firing incompetent contractors. Right now, you have a choice. You can walk away from my wife, leave Chicago, and never contact her again. If you do that, this ends here. Ryan straightened, perhaps remembering his athletic training or maybe just finding some backbone. And if I don't? Derek smiled, and something in that expression made Ryan take a step backward. If you don't, I'll destroy you so completely that you'll wish you'd never learned my wife's name. Derek's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. I know about your gambling debts. I know about the business account you've been skimming from. I know about the 3 married women in California and why you really left that state. Each revelation hit Ryan like a physical blow. Derek continued relentlessly. I also know that your business license expires next month, and the renewal requires a background check. I wonder what the state licensing board would think about your pattern of unprofessional relationships with clients. You can't prove anything, Ryan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Derek pulled up another photo on his phone, Ryan entering what appeared to be an illegal gambling establishment on the South Side. Danny Reeves used to do intelligence work for the Army. He's very thorough. The terrace door opened, and Brielle appeared, her face tight with worry. Derek? Is everything all right? People are starting to ask where you went. Derek looked at his wife, this woman he'd loved for 18 years, who'd shared his bed and his dreams and his trust. In her eyes, he saw fear and guilt and a desperate hope that somehow this situation could be managed, contained, forgotten. Everything's fine, darling, Derek said. Ryan and I were just discussing business opportunities. Weren't we, Ryan? Ryan looked between Derek and Brielle, clearly understanding that he was trapped. Whatever he said next would determine whether this conversation ended with a quiet retreat or something much more destructive. Yes, Ryan said quietly. Mr. Townsend was explaining the local business climate. Good, Derek said. Then we understand each other. As they walked back into the ballroom, Derek caught Danny Reeves' eye across the room. Danny nodded slightly, confirming that everything had been recorded. The conversation on the terrace, Ryan's reaction to the photos, Brielle's guilty entrance, all of it captured for future use. But Derek wasn't satisfied with driving Ryan away. That would end the affair, but leave both his wife and her lover free to potentially reconnect in the future. Derek wanted permanent solutions, consequences that would last forever. The foundation of Ryan Kessler's life was about to experience a catastrophic failure, and Derek Townsend was going to enjoy every moment of the collapse. Chapter 5. Load-bearing stress. The week following the yacht club confrontation brought an unseasonable warmth to Chicago, as if the city itself was holding its breath before winter arrived. Derek maintained his normal routine. Early morning gym sessions, long days at construction sites, evening strategy sessions in his home office, while privately monitoring the first cracks in Ryan Kessler's carefully constructed life. Margaret Torres surveillance reports painted a picture of a man under increasing pressure. Ryan had missed 3 client appointments, spent 2 consecutive nights at an underground poker game in Chinatown, and made 4 trips to the bank in 3 days. Most telling, he'd driven past the Renaissance Hotel twice without stopping, confirming that his affair with Brielle had been temporarily suspended. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Danny Reeves. Package delivered. Target acquired the bait exactly as predicted. Derek smiled grimly. The bait was a fictional business opportunity. A wealthy client, supposedly interested in Ryan's services, contacted through an intermediary who claimed to represent a prominent Chicago family. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at an upscale restaurant in River North, where Ryan would discover that his prospective client was actually a federal agent investigating tax evasion in the personal fitness industry. Of course, there was no real investigation. The agent was an associate of Danny's, a former military police officer who now worked in corporate security. But Ryan wouldn't know that until after he'd been thoroughly terrified and convinced that his financial improprieties were under federal scrutiny. Derek's office intercom buzzed. "Mr. Townsend, your wife is here to see you." Derek looked up from his construction plans, surprised. Brielle rarely visited his office, claiming the industrial atmosphere made her uncomfortable. Her presence here, unannounced and during business hours, suggested desperation. "Send her in." Brielle entered wearing a cream-colored designer suit that accentuated her model-perfect figure. But Derek noticed the details that others would miss: the slight tremor in her hands, the carefully applied concealer that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion around her eyes, the way she hesitated before speaking. "Derek, we need to talk." "Of course," Derek replied, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "What's on your mind?" Brielle sat carefully, crossing her legs in a gesture that had once been unconsciously sensual, but now seemed calculated. "It's about Saturday night. At the yacht club." "What about it?" "I thought the evening went well. Several investors expressed strong interest in expanding their commitments." "I'm not talking about business," Brielle said, her voice tight. "I'm talking about your conversation with Ryan Kessler." Derek leaned back in his chair, his expression neutral. Ryan seemed like a nice enough man. Professional, knowledgeable about fitness trends. "What?" "Derek, please don't play games with me. I know you suspect something." The admission hung in the air between them like smoke from a building fire. Derek had been waiting for this moment, when Brielle's guilt and fear would overcome her caution. "Suspect what exactly?" Derek asked, his voice perfectly calm. Brielle's composure cracked slightly. "I've made some mistakes. Poor choices that I regret deeply. But nothing that can't be fixed, nothing that has to destroy our family." Derek stood and moved to the window that overlooked his current construction project, a 40-story office tower that would house the headquarters of 3 major corporations. The building rose from the Chicago skyline like a monument to careful planning and precise execution. "Tell me about these mistakes," Derek said without turning around. I developed feelings for someone I shouldn't have. Someone who works at my gym. It was stupid and selfish, and I'm ending it." "Feelings," Derek repeated. "That's an interesting word choice. Very vague. We never. It was just emotional. Conversations, maybe some inappropriate attention, but nothing physical. Nothing that really mattered." Derek turned from the window, his steel gray eyes meeting his wife's blue ones. "Brielle, I've been married to you for 18 years. In all that time, I've never lied to you about anything important. Not about money, not about other women, not about my feelings or my intentions. I need you to think very carefully about whether you want to maintain that same standard of honesty." Brielle's face went pale. She understood the implications. Derek was offering her one chance to tell the truth, to potentially salvage something from the wreckage of their marriage. She began, then stopped. Derek could see her calculating, trying to determine how much he actually knew versus how much he suspected. "Let me help you," Derek said, returning to his desk and opening his laptop. "Last Tuesday afternoon, you told me you were having lunch with Mrs. Patterson. But Mrs. Patterson was having a root canal that day. I called her dentist to verify." Brielle's eyes widened. 3 weeks ago, you claimed to have a book club meeting. But you don't belong to a book club, and the restaurant where you supposedly met charged your credit card for a table for 2. Derek continued methodically, presenting evidence like a prosecutor building a case. Hotel receipts, GPS data from her car, credit card charges that contradicted her stated whereabouts. With each piece of evidence, Brielle seemed to shrink further into her chair. "How long have you been watching me?" she whispered. "Long enough to understand the scope of your betrayal," Derek replied. "The question now is what we do about it." "Derek, I love you. I love our family. What happened with Ryan was a mistake, a moment of weakness. But it's over now. Is it?" Derek picked up his phone and showed her Margaret Torres photos from the Renaissance Hotel. "These were taken Tuesday, the same day you lied about lunch with Mrs. Patterson." Brielle stared at the photos in horror, her hand rising to cover her mouth. "Oh God." "Derek, I can explain." "No explanations necessary," Derek interrupted. "The photos speak for themselves. But I'm curious about one thing. Does Ryan know that I know?" The question was a trap, and Brielle walked into it completely. You confronted him at the yacht club, she said. He told me you showed him pictures, threatened to ruin his business. Derek, you can't destroy someone's life over this. Derek smiled coldly. Can I? I've spent the last week researching Mr. Kessler very thoroughly. Did you know he's been skimming money from his business accounts? Or that he has gambling debts to some very unpleasant people on the South Side? Or that this isn't his first affair with a married client? Each revelation hit Brielle like a physical blow. Derek could see her beginning to understand that Ryan wasn't the successful, stable man she'd thought she was falling in love with. None of that matters, Brielle said desperately. What matters is us, our marriage, our family. I'll do anything to fix this, Derek. Counseling, therapy, whatever you think we need. Derek closed his laptop and studied his wife's face. She was beautiful, even in her distress. For a moment, he remembered why he'd fallen in love with her. The confidence, the grace, the way she believed in his dreams when he was just a working-class kid with ambitious plans. But those memories were poisoned now by the knowledge of her betrayal. Every kiss, every intimate moment, every time she'd said, I love you, over the past 8 months had been a lie. Brielle, Derek said quietly, I want you to go home and pack a bag. You're going to stay at your mother's house in Lake Forest for a while. Derek, please. This isn't a negotiation. I need time to think, to decide what I want to do next. And I need you out of my house while I'm thinking. Brielle stood shakily, tears streaming down her face. What about Chloe? What are we going to tell her? We'll tell her the truth, Derek said. That her mother made choices that have consequences. After Brielle left, Derek sat in his office for a long time, staring out at the construction project below. Workers moved with practiced efficiency, each person focused on their specific task, all of them contributing to something larger than themselves. Derek had spent his entire adult life building things. Homes, office buildings, monuments to human achievement. Now he was discovering that destruction could be just as satisfying, especially when it was carefully planned and precisely executed. His phone rang. Danny Reeves. The meeting with the fake federal agent went exactly as planned, Danny reported. Target is now convinced he's under federal investigation for tax evasion. He's scheduled to meet with a tax attorney tomorrow morning. Another one of our people who will confirm his worst fears. Good, Derek said. What about the gambling debts? Those are real and getting worse. Target owes about $45,000 to some people who don't accept payment plans. I might have mentioned to the right people that Target has been flashing cash around, talking about landing a big client. Derek nodded. In his experience, pressure applied from multiple directions was much more effective than a single point of attack. Ryan Kessler was about to discover that his world was collapsing from every direction at once. Phase 2 begins tomorrow, Derek said. Make sure everything is documented. Always is, boss. You sure you want to go this far? Derek thought about Brielle's tears, her desperate pleas for forgiveness, her promise to do anything to save their marriage. For just a moment, he considered the possibility of mercy, of finding a way to rebuild rather than destroy. Then he remembered the hotel photos, the 8 months of lies, the way she'd kissed Ryan Kessler in that parking garage while Derek was home with their daughter, completely unaware that his wife was betraying everything he'd worked to build. I'm sure, Derek said. They wanted to tear down my life. Now they get to see what happens when someone with real power decides to return the favor. The foundation of Ryan Kessler's existence was about to experience total structural failure, and Derek Townsend was going to enjoy every moment of the collapse. Chapter 6, Critical Failure Point. Thursday morning brought the kind of gray October sky that made Chicago feel like a concrete tomb. Derek sat in his Mercedes across the street from Ryan Kessler's apartment building, a converted warehouse in an area that was trying desperately to be gentrified but hadn't quite succeeded. Through his binoculars, he watched Ryan's third-floor window, where movement suggested a man who hadn't slept well. Margaret Torres' voice crackled through Derek's earpiece. Target has been pacing for 2 hours. 3 phone calls to unknown numbers, all lasting less than 30 seconds. Classic signs of panic. Derek smiled grimly. Phase 2 of his plan was already showing results, and they'd barely begun. Yesterday's meeting with the fake federal agent had shaken Ryan badly, but today would be much worse. Any sign he's planning to run? Derek asked. Not yet, but he's definitely considering his options. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Danny Reeves. Package 2 delivered. Target should be receiving it right about now. Through his binoculars, Derek watched Ryan's apartment window. Within moments, he saw Ryan's silhouette moving frantically, clearly agitated by whatever he'd just received. The package was a series of documents that appeared to be legal papers. A formal complaint filed with the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation regarding unprofessional conduct with clients, along with a notice that Ryan's business license was under review. The documents looked completely official because Derek had hired the same legal graphic designer who created contracts for Townsend Construction. Of course, no actual complaint had been filed, but Ryan wouldn't know that, especially in his current state of mind. Derek's earpiece crackled again. Target is on the move. Exiting the building, heading for his car. Derek started his Mercedes and followed at a distance as Ryan's BMW wound through Chicago traffic. As Derek had predicted, Ryan was heading straight to Brielle. 20 minutes later, Derek watched from the parking lot of a nearby Starbucks as Ryan's BMW pulled into the driveway of Brielle's mother's house in Lake Forest. Through Margaret Torres' telescopic lens, they captured Ryan's agitated gestures as he argued with Brielle on the front steps. Can you hear what they're saying? Derek asked. Bits and pieces, Margaret replied through the earpiece. He's talking about federal agents, investigations, needing money. She's telling him to calm down, that they need to be smart about this. Derek's phone rang. Brielle. Derek, we need to talk immediately. I'm in the middle of a site inspection, Derek replied calmly. Can it wait? No, it cannot wait. Ryan is here, and he's telling me that federal agents are investigating his business. He thinks you're behind it. That's an interesting theory. Why would I be involved with federal agents? Derek, please. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but this has gone far enough. You're destroying an innocent man's life. Derek almost laughed at the word innocent. Through his binoculars, he could see Ryan pacing frantically on Brielle's mother's front lawn while Brielle tried to calm him down. If Ryan Kessler is under federal investigation, that's between him and the government, Derek said. I'm a construction contractor, not a law enforcement officer. The timing is too convenient, Brielle said desperately. First you confront him at the yacht club. Now suddenly he's being investigated? You have connections, Derek. You know people in the city, in the federal building. Derek did indeed have connections, but not the kind Brielle was imagining. His relationship with various officials was based on construction permits and zoning approvals, not criminal investigations. Brielle, I think you're giving me credit for more influence than I actually have. If your friend has legal troubles, perhaps he should consult an attorney. Through Margaret's telephoto lens, Derek watched Ryan grab Brielle's shoulders, his body language becoming increasingly aggressive. Brielle pulled away, clearly frightened by his behavior. He's falling apart, Derek. Yesterday he was calm and professional. Today he's different, desperate. Desperation makes people unpredictable, Derek agreed. Perhaps you should keep your distance until he sorts out his legal issues. I can't abandon him when he needs help. The words hung in the air between them, a perfect summary of Brielle's misplaced loyalty. She was willing to risk her family, her marriage, even her safety for a man she'd known for 8 months. That's your choice, Derek said finally. But make it carefully. After hanging up, Derek continued watching the drama unfold in his ex-wife's mother's driveway. Ryan was becoming increasingly agitated, his gestures more violent, his voice rising to levels that prompted neighbors to peer out their windows. Margaret Torres' voice was urgent in Derek's earpiece. Derek, I think we might have a problem. Target is losing control. Through the telephoto lens, Derek could see that Ryan had grabbed Brielle's wrist and was pulling her toward his car. Brielle was resisting, trying to break free, her face showing genuine fear. Should I intervene? Margaret asked. Derek hesitated. This was moving faster than he'd planned. He'd wanted to pressure Ryan, to destroy his business and financial stability, but he hadn't intended for Brielle to be physically threatened. Before Derek could respond, Brielle's mother appeared on the front steps. Catherine Morrison, a 70-year-old former teacher with the spine of a drill sergeant. She was carrying what appeared to be a baseball bat. "Young man, you have exactly 10 seconds to release my daughter and leave my property." Catherine's voice carried clearly across the lawn. "Or I'm calling the police and then demonstrating why I was the softball coach at Lake Forest High School for 30 years. Ryan immediately released Brielle's wrist, clearly recognizing that he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. He said something that made both women recoil, then stormed back to his car and drove away with enough force to leave tire marks on the pavement. Derek's phone rang again. "Brielle," her voice shaking. "Derek, I need police protection. Ryan just threatened me. He said if I don't help him get money to pay off his debts, he'll make sure everyone knows about our affair, including Chloe." Derek felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Threatening his daughter crossed a line that even Derek's carefully controlled anger hadn't anticipated. "Are you hurt?" Derek asked, his voice deadly calm. "No, but I'm scared. He's not the man I thought he was. When people are desperate, when they feel cornered." "Where is he now?" "He drove off, but Derek, he knows where we live. He knows Chloe's school schedule, her routines. He's been to our house." Derek closed his eyes, calculating rapidly. His plan to systematically destroy Ryan Kessler had been working perfectly, but now the man was becoming unpredictable, potentially dangerous. That required a different approach. "Pack a bag," Derek said. "You and your mother are coming to stay at the house until this is resolved." "Derek, I don't think. This isn't a request, Brielle. You've put our family in danger through your choices. Now I'm going to fix it." Derek hung up and immediately called Danny Reeves. "We're accelerating the timeline," Derek said. "Target just threatened my family. I want him neutralized permanently." "How permanently are we talking?" Derek thought about Ryan's hands on Brielle's wrists, his threats against Chloe, the way fear had made Brielle's voice shake over the phone. "Completely," Derek said. "I want Ryan Kessler to disappear from our lives so thoroughly that it'll be like he never existed. That's going to require a different kind of operation. Then run a different kind of operation. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes." Derek ended the call and started his Mercedes. As he drove toward Lake Forest to collect his estranged wife and mother-in-law, he reflected on how quickly situations could escalate beyond careful planning. He'd started this as a systematic campaign to destroy two people who had betrayed him. Now, it was becoming something much more primitive and dangerous. But Derek Townsend had built his fortune by adapting to changing circumstances, by finding solutions when others saw only problems. Ryan Kessler had made the mistake of threatening Derek's family. Now he was going to discover that some structures, when they collapse, take everything nearby down with them. Chapter 7: Demolition. The emergency meeting took place in Derek's home office at 11 p.m. on Friday night, exactly 24 hours after Ryan Kessler had made his threats. Present were Derek, Danny Reeves, and Margaret Torres, along with two associates Derek had never met, but whose presence spoke volumes about how serious this situation had become. The first associate introduced himself simply as Collins, mid-40s, military-bearing, eyes that suggested he'd seen things that normal people never encountered. The second was younger, maybe 30, with the kind of lean build that came from serious physical training. He didn't offer a name at all. "Situation report," Derek said, settling behind his desk while the others arranged themselves in chairs that suddenly felt like war room furniture. Margaret Torres consulted her notes. "Target has been increasingly erratic since yesterday's confrontation. He missed a client appointment this morning, withdrew what appears to be his remaining cash from 3 different bank accounts, and made contact with known associates of the gambling operation he owes money to." Danny picked up the briefing. "Our intelligence suggests he's trying to negotiate a payment extension, but these aren't people who accept installment plans. He's got maybe 48 hours before they start applying serious pressure." "What kind of pressure?" Derek asked. Colin spoke for the first time. "The kind that leaves permanent reminders about the importance of paying debts on time." Derek nodded. In his construction business, he'd occasionally dealt with subcontractors who had connections to Chicago's less legal enterprises. He understood the implications. "Has he made any additional contact with my family?" 3 attempts to call your wife," Margaret reported. "She didn't answer." He also drove past your daughter's school twice this afternoon. Derek felt that cold rage settle deeper in his chest. Threatening Brielle was one thing. She'd made her choices and would live with the consequences. But involving Chloe crossed every line Derek recognized. Options? Derek asked. The unnamed associate spoke for the first time. Multiple approaches available. We can make him disappear temporarily or permanently. We can arrange for his creditors to collect their debts with interest. We can facilitate his departure from Chicago under circumstances that ensure he never returns. Costs and risks. Collins leaned forward. Temporary solutions are cheaper, but come with ongoing risk. Permanent solutions are more expensive, but provide absolute resolution. Forced relocation is middle ground, effective, but requires ongoing monitoring. Derek considered the options while studying the faces around his desk. These men dealt in violence and coercion as matter-of-factly as Derek dealt in concrete and steel. The realization should have been disturbing, but Derek found it oddly comforting. I want him gone, Derek said finally. Completely, permanently, with no possibility of return. But I want it to look like natural consequences of his own poor choices. Danny nodded. His gambling debts provide perfect cover. Men who owe money to those people disappear regularly. Usually their bodies turn up in the Chicago River or Lake Michigan, but sometimes they're never found at all. Timeline. Tomorrow night, Collins said. Target has a meeting scheduled with his creditors at a warehouse on the south side. It's supposed to be a negotiation, but given his financial situation, Derek understood. Ryan Kessler was walking into a situation where violence was already likely. If that violence became lethal, if Ryan simply vanished into the kind of criminal underground that swallowed desperate men whole, no one would look too closely at the details. What about evidence? Investigation? Margaret Torres answered. Target has been behaving erratically for days. Multiple witnesses can testify to his increasingly desperate behavior. His financial records show massive debts to dangerous people. If he disappears, the most logical explanation is that he ran afoul of his creditors. And my involvement? Non-existent, Danny said firmly. You're a successful businessman whose wife had an affair. You discovered the affair, confronted the man. Your wife left him and moved back home. End of story. Derek stood and moved to his window, looking out at the dark expanse of Lake Michigan. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of streetlights and city noise, was the kind of emptiness where a man could disappear without a trace. Do it, Derek said without turning around. The meeting concluded with logistics that Derek preferred not to know in detail. Times, locations, the specific mechanics of how a man vanished from existence. Collins and his associate left first, disappearing into the night as quietly as they'd arrived. Margaret Torres packed her surveillance equipment. After tomorrow, I'll have a complete file documenting the target's erratic behavior, his debts, his threats against your family. If anyone asks questions, the paper trail will support the theory that he fled Chicago to escape his creditors. After she left, Derek and Danny sat in silence for several minutes. You sure about this, boss? Danny asked finally. Once it's done, it can't be undone. Derek thought about Chloe, about the fear in Brielle's voice, about the way Ryan's desperation had made him dangerous to people Derek loved. I'm sure, Derek said. Some problems require permanent solutions. Saturday passed with agonizing slowness. Derek maintained his normal weekend routine. Breakfast with Chloe, review of construction schedules, an afternoon spent working in his home office. Brielle stayed at her mother's house, having decided that returning home wasn't safe until Ryan's situation was resolved. Derek found himself checking his phone constantly, waiting for word that the problem had been eliminated. Collins had promised to contact him once everything was finished, but Derek had no idea what finished would actually look like. At 8:30 p.m., Derek's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Project completed successfully. Final cleanup in progress. Derek stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. Ryan Kessler, the man who'd been sleeping with Derek's wife for 8 months, who'd threatened Derek's family, who disrupted the carefully ordered world Derek had spent 20 years building, no longer existed. Derek poured himself a glass of 20-year-old scotch and stood at his office window, looking out at the lights of Chicago. The city sprawled in all directions, millions of people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, making their choices. Most of them would never understand that some choices carried consequences that couldn't be appealed or negotiated. That some men, when pushed too far, possessed the resources and determination to solve problems permanently. His phone rang. Brielle. Derek, I've been trying to reach Ryan all day. He was supposed to call me to let me know he was okay after yesterday. Have you considered that he might not want to talk to you, given how erratically he's been behaving? Something's wrong, Brielle said, her voice tight with worry. He was desperate yesterday, but he wouldn't just disappear without saying anything. Derek sipped his scotch, tasting victory and finality. Desperate men do desperate things, Brielle. Maybe he decided that leaving Chicago was his best option. He wouldn't leave without telling me. Whatever else happened between us, he cared about me. Did he? Or did he care about the money you represented, the lifestyle you provided access to? The question hung in the air between them. Derek could hear Brielle breathing, processing the implications. Derek, if something has happened to Ryan, what could have happened to him? I'm a construction contractor, not a criminal. If Ryan Kessler has disappeared, it's because of his own choices, his own debts, his own desperate behavior. After hanging up, Derek finished his scotch and prepared for bed. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of rebuilding his life on a foundation that was finally solid, finally free from the cracks that had threatened everything he'd worked to create. Ryan Kessler was gone, permanently, and Derek Townsend had engineered the most successful demolition project of his career. Chapter 8. Reconstruction. 3 weeks after Ryan Kessler's disappearance, Chicago's autumn had settled into the kind of crisp perfection that made the city feel like a postcard. Derek stood in his office reviewing the final plans for the Riverside Development Project, but his attention kept drifting to the police report that Margaret Torres had obtained through her contacts in the Chicago PD. The official investigation into Ryan Kessler's disappearance had concluded exactly as Derek had planned. Missing person, presumed fled due to gambling debts and creditor pressure. The detective assigned to the case had noted Ryan's increasingly erratic behavior, his substantial debts to persons unknown, and his last known location near a South Side warehouse district where bodies turned up with uncomfortable regularity. No evidence of foul play. No suspects. No reason to look beyond the obvious explanation that a desperate man had run afoul of dangerous people and paid the ultimate price. Derek's intercom buzzed. Mr. Townsend? Your wife is here. Derek looked up, surprised. He'd spoken to Brielle several times since Ryan's disappearance, but she hadn't visited his office. Her presence here suggested something important, possibly final. Send her in. Brielle entered wearing a simple black dress that made her look elegant and somehow diminished at the same time. The past 3 weeks had changed her. The confident, radiant woman who'd graced magazine covers had been replaced by someone who seemed to carry the weight of consequences she was only beginning to understand. Derek, thank you for seeing me. Of course. Please sit. Brielle settled into the chair across from his desk, the same chair where she'd made her desperate confessions 3 weeks earlier. But her demeanor now was different, subdued, perhaps even resigned. I know what you did, she said quietly. Derek's expression didn't change. I'm not sure what you mean. Ryan didn't just disappear, Derek. You made him disappear. Derek leaned back in his chair, studying his wife's face. That's a serious accusation. Do you have any evidence to support it? The timing, your connections, the way you've handled this entire situation with such precision. Brielle, a man with gambling debts to dangerous people, vanished after behaving increasingly erratically for weeks. The police have investigated and reached their conclusions. What exactly are you suggesting I could have done? Brielle was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I think you had him killed. The words hung in the air between them, like smoke from a building fire. Derek felt no surprise, no fear, only a curious sense of completion. His wife understood, finally, exactly who she'd betrayed and what that betrayal had cost. That's a remarkable theory, Derek said calmly. But even if it were true, what would you do about it? Go to the police with your suspicions? Explain how you know Ryan Kessler was more than just your personal trainer. Brielle's face crumpled. Derek, I loved him. No, Derek replied firmly. You love the excitement, the danger, the feeling of doing something forbidden. You love the way he made you feel about yourself. But you didn't love him enough to leave me for him, did you? You wanted to keep both lives, the stability I provided and the thrill he represented. That's not true, isn't it? In 8 months of affair, did you ever once ask me for a divorce? Did you ever suggest we separate, or that you needed space to figure out your feelings? Or did you simply enjoy having two men competing for your attention while you decided which life you preferred? Each question hit Brielle like a physical blow. Derek continued relentlessly. You made your choice when you decided to lie to me for 8 months. When you spent my money on hotel rooms and gifts for another man. When you came home to my bed after spending afternoons in his. I made a mistake. You made a series of calculated choices, Derek interrupted. And now you're living with the consequences. Brielle looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. What happens now? Do I disappear too? Derek was genuinely surprised by the question. You're the mother of my daughter, Brielle. Whatever else has happened between us, that matters. Then what? Derek opened his desk drawer and removed a manila folder, thick with legal documents. Divorce papers. Very generous terms, considering the circumstances. You keep the house in Lake Forest, a substantial monthly allowance, and access to Chloe according to a custody agreement that favors your involvement in her life. Brielle stared at the folder without touching it. And in exchange, you sign the papers, you never speak about Ryan Kessler to anyone, and you rebuild your life somewhere that isn't Chicago. You're exiling me. I'm giving you a choice. Accept these terms and start over with more money than most people see in a lifetime. Or refuse and face the consequences of having the details of your affair become public record in a contested divorce proceeding. Derek leaned forward. Think carefully about which option serves Chloe's best interests. Brielle picked up the folder with trembling hands. Can I have time to review these? Take all the time you need, but understand that my patience has limits. After Brielle left, Derek returned to his construction plans. The Riverside Development Project was entering its final phase, 27 luxury condominiums that would stand as monuments to vision, planning, and flawless execution. His phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Dad, can we have dinner tonight? Just us. Derek smiled and typed back. Of course. Your choice of restaurant. His daughter had been remarkable through the entire ordeal, maintaining her grades and her activities while navigating the emotional complexity of her parents' disintegrating marriage. She'd asked questions about Ryan's disappearance, but seemed to accept Derek's explanations that desperate people sometimes made desperate choices. Chloe was smart enough to understand that her father had been protecting their family, even if she didn't know the specific details of how that protection had been accomplished. Derek's office phone rang. Danny Reeves. Collins wanted me to let you know that all loose ends have been tied up. The warehouse where Target had his final meeting burned down last night. Electrical fire, apparently. Nothing suspicious, but eliminates any potential physical evidence. Good, Derek said. And the associates who facilitated the resolution? Paid in full and departed for destinations unknown. They were never here. We never met them. The project never happened. Derek nodded. In his experience, the most successful operations were the ones that left no traces, no lingering connections, no possibility of future complications. What about Margaret Torres? She's filing her final report and closing the case. As far as she's concerned, she was hired to document an extramarital affair, which she did. Anything that happened after that is outside her scope of involvement. Derek felt a sense of completion, of a complex project finally reaching its conclusion. Every element had been planned, executed, and documented according to specifications. The desired outcome had been achieved within budget and ahead of schedule. Ryan Kessler was gone. Brielle would sign the divorce papers and rebuild her life elsewhere. Chloe would remain in Chicago with Derek, protected from the chaos that had briefly threatened their family. Derek Townsend had dismantled 2 lives with the same precision he brought to constructing buildings. The process had been brutal but necessary, permanent but justifiable. As Derek prepared to leave his office for dinner with his daughter, he reflected on the lessons learned from this project. Trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. Betrayal demanded consequences proportional to the damage inflicted. And some problems required solutions that existed outside the boundaries of conventional morality. Derek had built his fortune by understanding that every structure needed a solid foundation. Now he was building a new life on foundations that were absolutely unshakable, reinforced by the knowledge that he possessed the resources and determination to protect what mattered most. The reconstruction phase was beginning, and this time, Derek would make sure that every beam was load-tested, every joint was secure, and every potential weakness was eliminated before it could threaten the integrity of the whole. Chapter 9. The Final Blueprint. 6 months later, Derek stood on the observation deck of the completed Riverside Development Project, watching the sunrise paint Chicago's skyline in shades of gold and amber. 27 luxury condominiums rose behind him, each one occupied, each one generating the kind of returns that made investors very happy indeed. The project had been his most successful to date, launching Townsend Construction into the top tier of Chicago's development companies. Derek's personal net worth had doubled, his professional reputation had never been stronger, and his daughter was thriving as a senior at one of the city's most prestigious private schools. In every measurable way, Derek Townsend had won. His phone buzzed with a message from Chloe. "Dad, accepted early admission to Northwestern. Can't wait to tell you all about it at dinner tonight." Derek smiled as he typed back congratulations. His daughter had chosen to stay in Chicago for college, a decision that suggested she felt secure in the life Derek had rebuilt for them. She'd adapted to her parents' divorce with remarkable resilience, perhaps understanding at some level that the dissolution of their marriage had eliminated sources of tension and uncertainty that had been affecting the entire family. Derek's reflection was interrupted by the arrival of Margaret Torres, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose work had exceeded all expectations. "Final surveillance report," she said, handing Derek both a coffee and a manila folder. As requested, Derek opened the folder and reviewed photographs taken over the past week. Brielle, now living in Scottsdale under her maiden name, worked as a coordinator for a high-end art gallery. She lived in a modest but elegant townhouse, drove a sensible car, and appeared to have adopted a lifestyle appropriate to someone starting over. More importantly, she'd maintained complete silence about Ryan Kessler's disappearance. The private investigator Derek had hired to monitor her communications had found no evidence that she'd contacted police, journalists, or anyone else who might be interested in her theories about what had really happened. "She's learned to live with uncertainty," Margaret observed, "which is probably the smartest choice she could make." Derek nodded. Brielle had signed the divorce papers without modification, accepted the generous settlement terms, and relocated as agreed. She sent birthday cards to Chloe and maintained appropriate contact as befitted a divorced mother, but she'd made no attempts to challenge Derek's version of events or return to Chicago. "Any indication she's planning to remarry?" "She's been dating a gallery owner in Phoenix. Divorced father of 2, drives a Honda, belongs to a book club. About as different from Ryan Kessler as it's possible to get." Derek closed the folder. "And the final invoice?" Margaret handed him an envelope. "Professional services rendered, case closed, all materials delivered as specified." Derek wrote her a check that included a substantial bonus. Margaret Torres had been worth every dollar, providing the kind of thorough documentation that made Derek's subsequent actions both possible and legally secure. After Margaret left, Derek remained on the observation deck, considering how completely his life had been reconstructed. The divorce had been finalized with minimal publicity. Chloe had thrived in the stable environment Derek provided. Townsend Construction had expanded into 3 new markets and landed contracts worth more than Derek had previously earned in entire years. His phone rang. "Danny Reeves. Thought you'd want to know. Final payment cleared this morning. All accounts closed, all contractors satisfied, all materials disposed of according to specifications. Derek understood. The last financial traces of Ryan Kessler's elimination had been erased. Collins and his associate had been paid through accounts that no longer existed, using money that couldn't be traced to Derek or any of his business interests. Any ongoing concerns? None whatsoever. Project completed, site cleaned, no environmental impact detected. Derek smiled at Danny's use of construction terminology to describe activities that had nothing to do with building anything. Excellent work. All of it. Just following the blueprint, boss. Same as always. After ending the call, Derek took out his personal phone and scrolled through his contacts. Over the past 6 months, he'd been invited to numerous social events, introduced to several attractive women who clearly saw him as an eligible bachelor, and generally welcomed back into Chicago's social circles as a successful single father. But Derek felt no interest in romantic relationships. The experience of betrayal had changed something fundamental in his approach to trust and intimacy. He enjoyed the company of women, appreciated their conversation and perspectives, but he had no desire to make himself vulnerable to the kind of devastation that love could bring. Perhaps that would change in time. Perhaps he would eventually meet someone who could earn the kind of absolute trust that Derek would require. But for now, he was content with the life he'd built for himself and his daughter. Derek's attention was drawn to movement in the parking lot below. A familiar figure emerged from a black sedan, Detective Sarah Chun, the police officer who'd handled Ryan Kessler's missing person case. She was accompanied by a man Derek didn't recognize, someone whose bearings suggested federal law enforcement. Derek felt a moment of cold calculation as he watched the two figures enter the building. This could be routine, a follow-up interview, additional questions about the missing person investigation, or it could be something more serious. Either way, Derek was prepared. He'd spent the past 6 months ensuring that every aspect of his involvement in Ryan Kessler's disappearance was either completely legal or entirely untraceable. He'd paid taxes on all income, documented all business expenses, and maintained relationships with law enforcement that were cordial and professional. Derek's phone buzzed with a call from building security. "Mr. Townsend? There are 2 police officers here who'd like to speak with you." "Send them up." Derek straightened his tie and prepared to meet with law enforcement for what he suspected would be the final time regarding the Ryan Kessler matter. He'd built his entire strategy around this moment, when his version of events would be tested against whatever evidence the authorities had managed to gather. As Derek waited for the elevator to deliver his visitors, he reflected on the fundamental truth that had guided every decision over the past 6 months. The most successful lies were the ones that were almost entirely true. Derek Townsend was exactly what he appeared to be, a successful businessman whose wife had betrayed him, who discovered the affair and ended his marriage accordingly. Everything else was simply a matter of perspective and evidence. And Derek had made very sure that the evidence supported only one possible conclusion. The elevator doors opened, and Derek prepared to demonstrate that some structures, when built correctly, could withstand any kind of pressure test that authority might apply. After all, he'd had 6 months to prepare for this final inspection, and Derek Townsend had never failed a quality review in his life. Derek Townsend had built his fortune on the principle that every structure needed a solid foundation. In the end, he constructed something more valuable than any building, a new life built on the complete elimination of those who had threatened everything he'd worked to create. Some men forgave. Some men forgot. Derek Townsend was neither kind of man, and in the gleaming towers of Chicago's skyline, his legacy would stand forever, a monument to the truth that betrayal, when properly answered, could become the cornerstone of something infinitely stronger than what it had destroyed. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.